Hi, this is a tutorial on how to construct a lantern of hope. You should have picked up a kit last week from the PTA, and this is just a quick how-to on some options of how to decorate your glass lantern. So open up your kit and make sure that these items are inside. You should have received a jar, tissue paper, a battery-powered candle, and a black permanent marker. In addition to those, you are also going to need a pair of scissors, a paintbrush, and some glue. It doesn't matter what kind of glue, any kind of school glue, Elmer's, if you have Mod Podge, that works too. Any paintbrush. It's just to spread the glue onto the jar, so it really doesn't matter the size or the texture. Anything will do. So once you have those items, let's start thinking about what you want your lantern to represent or to say. Candles have been used for centuries for creating an environment, whether it's a remembrance, a gathering of people, whether it's to welcome sailors home, as in a lighthouse, or guide the way, a celebration like a birthday cake with candles. Sometimes we just light them to create a soothing environment. Maybe you light them at dinner or when you're in the bath or just because. So what story do you want yours to tell, or what do you want it to provide for you? I made a couple ahead of time. So this one, here I'll show you what it looks like lit, is a forest. For me, the forest is a sanctuary. It's a place of fearlessness and calm and wonder. This one is just the simplicity of a hug. So think about what you want yours to say and start doodling down some ideas. What does hope look like to you? There are no rules, whatever you want to do. If you want to get a scrap piece of paper and just start jotting down some ideas. Once you come up with an idea, you're going to get your tissue paper and decide on whether or not you want the whole jar to be covered in a base color. So I'm going to go with yellow, and the pieces are pretty big. As you can see, they're really big. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this just right in half, right down the middle with my scissors, because it makes it a little easier to manage. So I'm just going to cut this in half. Doesn't have to be perfect because it is going to be trimmed. Put the other piece away. And I'm going to get my jar and take the cap off. You don't need the cap. You can discard that. So make sure that you're protecting your surface underneath. I am using the paper bag that the kit came in. You're going to get your jar and you want to measure the tissue paper so that it wraps all the way around the jar to cover it. I'm using the bottom of the jar as a leveling. So the tissue paper is right along the bottom of the jar. And I'm just going to get it and I'm going to roll it around until I have an overlap of maybe a half of an inch. And I'm just going to secure it with one hand, and I'm going to get my scissors and I'm just going to cut down. And then you can discard the other piece. So now I have a pretty decent overlap of my jar, so I can trim that later if I want to, or you can trim it now if you want to so that it has a cleaner seam than that. But it doesn't really matter because tissue paper can be layered. So as you can see, it's much taller than my actual candle. So again, I'm using the bottom of the jar as a level, and I'm going to wrap it around, hold the tissue paper with one hand, and then I have my scissors, And I'm going to cut down until I can see the top of the glass and cut down to it. As you can see, the glass top is right there. So then, using the top of the jar, you can hear it, I just have the blade of the scissors resting on it, and I'm just going to cut around. It doesn't have to be perfect. So now I have a piece of tissue paper that is measured to my jar that will cover the entire jar when I'm finished. I'm going to put the jar to the side, and now I have my piece of tissue paper. The tissue paper has two sides. One is a little bit smoother than the other. So I want to draw on the smoother side because the markers that I'm going to use slide better on that texture. So put the rougher side down. And then you can get your marker that came with the kit, or any markers that you want. You can use any kind of marker. Tissue paper is very fragile. It tears very easily. So you want to be really gentle when you're drawing your picture on it. It doesn't have to be a picture. It can be words, it can be a symbol, it can be an entire scene. It doesn't matter. There are no rules. Just be very gentle when you're drawing on it, and don't go over the same place on the tissue paper too many times because it will become saturated and it can tear. So make sure that you have your surface protected and start drawing your design. I have chosen stars as my design, so I'm just going to draw them onto the tissue paper and I'm going to color them in. Again, it's anything that you want to do. So I'm going to do that until I have covered my whole tissue paper because that's the design that I wanted to do. So to speed it up, I have one ready. So this is what my final piece is going to look like. So I'm going to get my jar and I'm going to turn it upside down so that the opening is on the bottom. So remember now that my jar is upside down, that I need to make sure that my image is upside down. So if this is the top, now I'm going to flip it over so that it matches my jar, because otherwise when you flip it back over, your drawing is going to be upside down. So I'm sticking my hand in my jar just because it makes it easier to hold, and I don't want to get glue on my hands. So get your paintbrush and your glue, and make sure that you don't get any on your paper until you want it on there, because then it can stick to itself. Paint. I'm just going to spread it all over the jar, the whole thing, or wherever you want the tissue paper to stick. Again, this is only if you want to cover your entire jar in a solid piece of paper, or if you want the whole thing to be covered. You can also just do small pieces of shapes if you want. Then you would only put the glue where that piece of paper is going to go, so that it doesn't make the glass blurry when the glue dries. So I'm just spreading. It doesn't have to be neat. I just want it to cover wherever I want the tissue paper to go. And in this case, it is all over. So that looks pretty good. Spread it around. And now I'm going to set my jar back again upside down. As you can see, it's covered in glue now. So if you have a little bit of glue on your hand, make sure that it's off, because when you pick up your tissue paper, it's going to stick to it and it can rip your design. So I have my paper and it's upside down again. And now I'm going to carefully stick it on where I want it. Once it's stuck, once it touches the glue, it's on there. So I'm wrapping it, and because my jar is curved, I am going to have some wrinkles in the tissue paper, and that is totally fine. So I have a pretty good overlap of tissue paper here, but that's okay because it doesn't mess up my design at all. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick that down with a little bit of extra glue. If it messes up your design, you can just trim it off. So now my hands are nice and dry. They don't have glue on them, so I'm just going to lightly tap the tissue paper so that it sticks to the glue that's there. I don't want to rub it too much because then it can tear the tissue paper. And as you can see, it's kind of wrinkling around the jar, which is totally fine. So now I can get it, and I can turn it right side up. And get my candle. And voila, you have a lantern. There are no rules. You can do it however you want. Once the glue dries on the tissue paper, you can add onto the tissue paper. So this was one that I did that's already dry, so I'm going to get some colored marker and add and just draw right onto the tissue paper. Just make sure that it is already dry. But as you can see, you can just draw right onto the tissue paper. If you decide later that you want to add some color. This one started out as just black and white, and then as it dried, I added the color to it once it was completely dry. Again, no rules. It can be words, it can be designs, it could be a whole story. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. Have fun and enjoy.